Hello, my Specguns, it is I, with Blood, the ghoul next door, your favorite ghoul fiend. And if you saw my February wrap-up, you know that I did some book buying in the month of February. And we'll get to that in a second. One of the things I also said was I was thinking about adding more book content to this channel. I was originally toying with the idea of doing a second channel just for books, but no, I think I'm just going to keep everything on this channel, and I'm going to start just adding more book content. I'm not too sure if they're going to be strictly a book vlog episode each, or if I'm going to sprinkle them into more of the wrap-up vlogs or whatever, but this would be the first one. So one of the books I bought in February was Wuthering Heights. Now, I have read a lot of classics, but I've never read this one. And I thought, with the new movie coming out, this is the perfect time to get a copy, because, well, it was on sale. It was on sale right on because of the movie, and I got the movie tie-in. So it's just the front cover, and then the back cover has like the movie, who's in the movie and the production company. And when I went in there to buy the book, I wasn't too sure if this was strictly the story or if this was one of those script versions, because I have two versions of Dracula. I have a couple of versions of Dracula, but I have the 1992 Bram Stoker's edition of Dracula, which is the movie script, and then I have the regular normal Dracula, but they both happen to have covers from the movie. So I wasn't too sure if this was the script or if this was the actual book, but you get a couple of pages in. There is a note from the author that says, "This edition reprints the first edition published in 1847, with the exception of obvious printing errors." So it's the original story, but they've fixed any quote-unquote printing errors or spelling errors that would have been a common thing back in, what did I just say, 1847, because a lot of words were, a lot of people didn't really know how to spell, so they sounded it out. So yeah, I will be back in a little bit. First off, I guess I should say I've already read a few pages, and I think we've been introduced to all our characters, or the majority of our characters, which there's already 10-12 characters introduced within the first 5 pages. And I'm pretty sure that's all of them. We open up with, what was the character's name now? I don't have my glasses on. Mr. Lockwood. The story for part of it is being told through his eyes. So Mr. Lockwood he's just moved to Wuthering Heights, and he goes to talk to his landlord, who ends up being the character Heathcliff. And he's treated very rudely, and he doesn't understand why. So the first couple of pages is just him kind of introducing himself to everybody. And that's where I am right now. And I will be back in a couple days after I've read a little bit more.
Did you know that Eclipse from the Twilight Saga is loosely based on Wuthering Heights? I have read this in the past. I don't remember much of it. Maybe once I'm finished reading Wuthering Heights, I might have to reread just this one, just to make a comparison.
And we're back. It is the 23rd, Monday the 23rd of February. And I remembered to grab my glasses this time. Still reading Wuthering Heights. So, I am currently on page 98. What's happened in this book so far? We open with the, which I briefly touched on in the last segment. We open with the new tenant coming to Wuthering Heights to talk to his landlord and kind of introduce himself and everything, and he's not greeted very well. He finds everyone in the household rude, and he doesn't understand why. And then it's the next day, because he says, well, I'll come back tomorrow for dinner. He kind of invites himself to dinner, and the weather is so bad that he ends up having to stay with them for the night. And then he's kind of, the maid kind of sneaks him into this room that nobody's supposed to go into, and he sleeps in there. And he hears something outside his window, and you're never totally sure if it's an actual ghost or if he's hallucinating because he's so scared. And then he, where I left off in the last segment, it's like the next day, and he's talking to the maid, and the maid has started telling him, like, it's Nellie, she's one of the main characters, and she's telling him how Heathcliff used to be and Catherine used to be when they were all kids, because they all grew up together. She was their Nellie, the maid, was their she was their maid, their servant as a child, but she was also sort of their sister, sort of their, like, adopted sister, foster sister, stepsister, whatever you want to call it. Sorry. And she's telling him that the tenant what it was like to grow up with them, and with Catherine's older brother. After Catherine's father dies, but right before, okay, I'm tripping over myself here. Catherine's father goes away somewhere for whatever reason after their mother has died, and he comes back with Heathcliff, and Heathcliff is said to be his ward, but you're always wondering if he's actually an illegitimate child because of the way he dotes on him. The father dies, the older brother is left in charge. The older brother is a drunk, abusive person. He has a secret wife that nobody knew about until after the funeral, and then that's where I was when, in the last segment, that was the scene where the secret wife was brought into the family. So since then, it's just kind of been Catherine and gets attacked by a dog by the neighbors, and the neighbors take her in, and there's a bit of a confusion on their time, on their age at that point, because there's a line in the book that kind of suggests that they're as young as 9 or 10, but then in the next sentence she talks about them being 12, 13. So I don't know if she was kind of jumping from one scene to the next, or if that was a deliberate screw up for some of the stuff that comes later, but I don't know. But Catherine gets bitten by the neighbor's dog. The neighbors take her in. The weather is bad. She stays with them for months while she heals from this dog bite, and she ends up falling in love with the brother of like the neighbor boy. She ends up falling in love with the neighbor boy, and they kind of grow up together. Catherine reimagines herself as more of a lady and less of a lower class. And then she gets married to the neighbor boy, and Heathcliff runs away. And he's gone for a couple of years. And I'm at the part where he has come back with he's more intelligent. He's somewhere along the line he learned how to read. So let's just read a couple of sentences, shall we? Like I said, I'm on page 98. My master's surprise equaled or exceeded mine. He remained for a minute at a loss how to address the ploughboy, as he had called him. Heathcliff dropped his slight hand and stood looking at him coolly until he chose to speak. "Sit down, sir," he said at length. "Mrs. Linton, recalling old times, would have me give you a cordial reception, and of course I am gratified that anything occurs to please her." "And I also," answered Heathcliff, "especially if it were anything in which I have a part. I shall stay an hour or two willingly." He looked... Even with my glasses on, I can't read. He took a seat opposite Catherine, who kept her gaze fixed on him as if she feared he would vanish were she to remove it. He did not raise his to her often. A quick glance now and then sufficed, but it flashed back each time more confidently the undisguised delight he drank from hers. Yeah, the husband really hates him. It just seems like, other than their father, all the men so far in the story hates Heathcliff. Catherine's brother, one of their servants, Joseph, who is a very religious person, constantly spouting off Bible verses, and Catherine's husband. They all seem to hate him. Oh, and Catherine's father-in-law seems to hate him as well. So this would be the part where I just sit here now and get some footage. Is that enough footage? That's enough footage. Okay. I guess I will be back in another couple of days. This took way longer. I thought it would only take me a day or two to get to this point, but it's the print is kind of deceiving. So I will be back in a couple of days after I've read a little bit more. And today is Saturday, March the 7th, 2026. All right. So I am on page 139, and it's been what, a week and a half or so, maybe 2 weeks since I last taped a segment. Not much has happened. I've read like 45 pages, I think, since the last segment. I didn't go back and watch. Not really much has happened. Basically, in this segment, Catherine has a tantrum and she decides to starve herself for a few days. And then she gets violently ill. Meanwhile, Heathcliff has run off and eloped with her sister-in-law, Isabella. And then Catherine finds out she's pregnant. That's all that's happened since the last segment. That is all that's happened since the last segment. I'm going to read a little piece. And I can say this, because this is a classic that's over, what, 100 and something years old. It's not 200 years old? Almost 200 years old. Because it is a classic, we can get away with reading a paragraph here and there, but any modern books, not going to be able to do that. So, all right. I should mention that Isabella sent to her brother some 6 weeks from her departure a short note announcing her marriage with Heathcliff. It appeared dry and cold, but at the bottom was dotted in with pencil an obscure apology and an entreaty for kind remembrance and reconciliation. Really, I can talk. Honest. If her proceeding had offended him, asserting that she would not help it then, and being done, she had now no power to repel it. Lyndon did not reply to this, I believe, and in Try that sentence again. Lyndon did not reply to this, I believe, and in a fortnight more. Good God, I'm stumbling today. This is an easy sentence. What the hell? What's wrong with me? I think it's because they've got so many commas in here. Lyndon did not reply to this, I believe, and in a fortnight more, I got a longer letter, which I considered odd, coming from the pen of a bride just out of the honeymoon. I'll read it, for I kept it yet. Any relic of the dead is precious, if they were valued living. If they were valued living. If they were. Yeah. Now I understand why the beginning of the book has that little note. I think I called it an author's note when it's technically is an editor's note, because about it being the original story, but with some how'd they word it, like printing errors. Now I know why. They put commas sometimes where they don't need to be, and they have run-on sentences where they don't they need commas. Yeah, the sentence structure can be a little jarring. But again, I guess you're not meant to read them out loud. You're kind of meant just to read it silently to yourself. Okay, well, I'm roughly halfway, not quite. Another couple of pages, I'll be halfway. So, let's see. How about I come back? How about I come back when I get to page 200? How's that? All right, I'll see you in a bit.
Okay, so I said the next time I catch up with you guys, it would be after I hit page 200. I'm not quite there yet, but I just passed the scene where the character of Catherine is violently sick. She gives birth and she dies. And it's kind of told off camera, so to speak. I can't think of a better term for it. It's a major turning point in the book, and instead of it being first person point of view, it's just kind of like, oh yeah, and then this happened. Just very oddly written, that makes me wonder, but that maybe Emily Bronte never witnessed a birth or something, or didn't really have any stories of birth that she had heard, which, as I'm saying that out loud, is absolutely ridiculous because of the time frame that she lived and this was written. It was so common to have a midwife and 4 or 5 other women in the room with you when it happens, when you give birth. So I just thought it was just such an odd way to tell a major crossroads in the story. It's just kind of, oh yeah, and then this happened. Okay, I'll be back in bed.
Oh, you can't see that. It's snowing. And it's the end of March, and it's snowing. Okay, so it's been a while. I finally finished reading the book. I had an entire, I should say it is April the 3rd, Friday, April the 3rd. I had an entire week where I did not get a chance to even think about reading the book because of the chaos going around here. I had like 4 maintenance people and 2 plumbers in because of a leaking pipe. So I finally had a chance to finish reading the book. And I believe we left off where Catherine had given birth and died. And I thought that was weird because it was just kind of like a throwaway comment almost. Major scene in the book, in the plot of this story, and it was just kind of like so casual, and I thought that was weird. So what happened then was we were introduced to a handful of new characters. The second generation of characters. Now let me see if I can remember the brother's name. I gotta look it up. The abusive brother. What was his name now? the one who had the secret wife. And of course I can't find that name. It was an H name. There's a lot of H names in this book. Okay, I can't find the name of the brother, but so he has, as I mentioned a segment or so ago, he had a secret wife, and they ended up having a child, a son. Son's name was Harrington? Oh, Henley. That was the name of the brother. Okay, so Henley, he had a son. He had a son named, it was another H name, Harrington, Harrington, Hareton. Harrington. I can't pronounce it. Anyway, so he has a son, and that child was actually born just before Catherine got sick. So he's about 5 years older than her daughter, who gets named Catherine. So I know this is where I've heard a lot of other people say that they found it very confusing because they use the same names. That was just such a common thing back in the day. It was a common thing up until about 1960 to name your child after yourself or your parent. So there was, like, you know how you have like, say, Catherine the Second in this case, or, you know, the entire 80s movie generation mocks that kind of having letters, or having numbers, I should say, after your name. Anyway, I'm getting distracted here. So Henley's son, I'm going to call him Harrington because I know I'm pronouncing it wrong anyway. So he's about 5 years older than Catherine's daughter, who's also named Catherine. And through half of the story, she's called Kathy, and half of it she's called Catherine. So we'll call her young Kathy. And then Heathcliff and his wife, Isabella, they had a son, Lyndon, named after Isabella's last name. So it's very confusing. So here we are. We've jumped about 12 years. So the kids are in their teens. They're about 12, 13 for young Kathy. Harrington is roughly, and I know I spelt it for you guys, and I still don't know how to pronounce it properly, so I'm saying Harrington. He's roughly 17, and Lyndon is roughly 12 as well. Heathcliff has decided, out of the goodness of his heart, to raise Harrington after Henley dies. Henley dies of drunkenness and stupidity and suicidal thoughts. So Heathcliff has pretty much swindled right before Henley died, Henley, sorry, right before Henley died, Heathcliff, there's a lot of H's, a lot of H names in this. Heathcliff has basically swindled the fortune out of his half brother, step brother, foster brother, however you want to refer to it, because it's never completely explained. The older brother, the older abusive brother. Because Henley was a gambler and a drunk, he's gambled away his rights to Wuthering Heights. So instead of it going to his son, Harrington, Heathcliff becomes the owner. And he lets Harrington live with him, but he treats him like a servant. And he doesn't really let him have an education. He finds out that Isabella has died. That Heathcliff finds out that his wife Isabella has died. She's long since run away from him. Had the baby, had Lyndon. Lyndon has never met him. In her will, she wants her brother, and I forgot what his name is, oh, to raise Lyndon. Edgar, sorry, it's Edgar. Older Catherine's husband, Edgar, Isabella's brother. She wants him to raise her son, Lyndon, at Thrush Crush Grange. It's such an awkward name. He tries. He takes the boy, and he's a very sickly boy. He's got so many health problems. He tries. He takes the boy, and he's only in his custody for like 24 hours. Then Heathcliff finds out and basically kidnaps his own son. A couple years go by, and young Catherine is out kind of exploring the neighborhood, if you want to call it that, against Nellie's wishes. Remember, Nellie is the one telling the story. She's the maid slash stepsister slash foster sister. Again, nothing is ever completely black and white. And young Catherine meets Harrington. She is upset to learn that he is her cousin. I actually think that happened before Lyndon came to live with them. It did. I'm sorry. She meets Harrington before Lyndon comes to live with them for what ends up being only 24 hours. So, okay, like I said, now we've jumped a couple years, and young Catherine is 16 years old. And she meets Lyndon while out. She meets Lyndon while out, and Heathcliff has got it in his mind that she is going to marry his son, because that he knows how sick the kid is, and he knows how sick her father is. So Edgar is he's I want to say it's supposed to be consumption, but I could be wrong. It's never exactly explained. It's just he kind of gets pneumonia, and that's about it. And that's the thing. They never explain what the sickness is that anybody has, and people just seem to get sick. But then again, when this was written, if you got pneumonia, you pretty much, that was the end of you. Okay, so where am I? Young Catherine is 16. Lyndon is roughly 15, 16 years old. Heathcliff gets it in his head they are going to be married, and he's moving the process along as fast as he can. Nellie, is the maid, is trying to prevent it because she knows what Heathcliff is trying to do, which is to get the control of both homes and all the fortune. He succeeds. He manages, by kidnapping young Catherine and forcing her on threat of death to marry Lyndon. Lyndon dies a month later, maybe 2 months. And at the same time, like within 24 hours, young Catherine's father, Edgar, dies. So instead of her fortune going to her and both properties going to her, the property goes to her husband, and because he dies so quickly, it reverts back to Heathcliff. So Heathcliff has half the neighborhood, basically. Then we're kind of brought back to where we started, the modern point in the story, with our tenant, Mr. Lockwood, and he's realizing that one of sorry he's realized that the lady that he met the first night he came to introduce himself is young Catherine, who at this point now is about 18 years old, and he's kind of set his sights on her. While this is happening, Heathcliff has lost his marbles. He's gone insane. And he's plotted, he wants older Catherine's grave dug up so that his coffin can be put in there. And he just loses it. He just goes mad. He's got everything he wants, and he begins to slowly, he refuses to eat, so he starves himself, and he starts seeing things. He's having hallucinations. Meanwhile, Harrington and young Catherine, after like a decade of hating each other, have started to fall for each other. Nellie decides this is a good idea, that now that they're kind of no longer under Heathcliff's influence, they make a perfect match, which is ironic because the very first time they ever met, not knowing who the other person was, they were extremely attracted to each other. And then as soon as she found out who he was, she kind of was disgusted by the fact that he had no title. And she refused to believe at first that he was related to her, that he was her cousin. So this story then ends. Heathcliff dies in his sleep. technically now, because of that, because Harrington was only his nephew, everything reverts back to young Catherine. She ends up having Wuthering Heights, all the property between it and Thrushcrush Grange. It's a terrible title for a house. Everyone else is happy now, except for poor Mr. Lockwood, who realizes he doesn't stand a chance at marrying young Catherine, even though he is honestly in love with her. And we end the book. We end it. I will read the last 2 pages. With him. Okay. I was going to the Grange one evening, a dark evening threatening thunder, and just at the turn of the heights I encountered a little boy with a sheep and 2 lambs before him. He was crying terribly, and I suppose the lambs were skittish, and I would not be guided. What is the matter, my little man? I asked. These Heathcliff... Oh, sorry. This is Nellie speaking. Sorry. This is Nellie speaking. They's Heathcliff and a woman yonder, under that nab, he blabbered. And aunt dart past them. AWDRNUT, pass them. I saw nothing, but neither the sheep nor he would go on, so I bid him take the road lower down. He probably raised the phantoms from thinking, as if travelled the moors alone, on the nonsense that he had heard his parents and companions repeat. Yet still, I didn't like being out in the dark now, and I don't like being left by myself in this grim house. I cannot help it. I shall be glad when they leave it and shift to the Grange. They are going to the Grange, then? I said. That would be Mr. Lockwood. Yes, answered Mrs. Dean, as soon as they are married, and that will be on New Year's. And who will live there then? Who will live here then? Referring to Wuthering Heights. Why, Joseph will take care of the house, and perhaps a lad to keep him company. They will live in the kitchen, and the rest will be shut up. For the use of such ghosts to choose to inhabit it, I observed. No, Mr. Lockwood, said Nellie, shaking her head. I believe the dead are at peace, but it is not right to speak of them with levity. At that moment, the garden gate swung to. The ramblers were returning. They are afraid of nothing, I grumbled, watching them approach through the window. Together they would brave Satan and all his legions. As they stepped into the door stones and halted to take a last look at the moon, or more correctly at each other by their light, that would be young Catherine and Harrington. I felt irresistibly impelled to escape them again, and pressing a remembrance into the hand of Mrs. Dean, and disregarding her exploitations at my rudeness, I vanished through the kitchen as they opened the house door, and so should have confirmed Joseph in his opinion of his fellow servants, gay in discretions, meaning happy back then, okay, had he not fortunately recognized me for a respectable character by the sweet ring of a sovereign at his feet. My walk home was lengthened by a diversion in the direction of the kirk, when beneath its walls I perceived decay that made progress even in 7 months. Many a window showed black gapes, deprived of glass, and slates jutted off, here and there beyond the right line of the roof, to be gradually worked off in coming autumn storms. I sought and soon discovered the 3 headstones on the slope next to the moor, the middle one grey and half buried in heath, Edgar Linden's only harmonized by the turf and moss creeping up its foot, Heathcliffs still bare. I lingered around them under the benign sky. Sorry. I lingered under them under. Oh my God. Well, it's not me if I'm not stumbling over my words. Okay. I lingered around them under the benign sky, watching the moths flutter among the heath and harebells, listened to the soft wind breathing through the grass, and wondered how anyone could ever imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in this quiet earth. So it ends with the man who started the story kind of half sullenly looking over the graves of our three main characters of older Catherine, of Heathcliff, and Edgar, her husband, the neighbor boy. Oh, okay, so when this book first came out, way back almost 200 years ago, it was considered so scandalous because it flat out said, this story is about domestic abuse in all its forms. We've got physical abuse, we've got degradation, we've got segregation, all the, gations out there, manipulation. Heathcliff is the master manipulator through 2 generations. And they point out at the end of the story that Joseph, who must be in his late 70s, because he says he's worked for the family for 60 years. So at the beginning of the story, for young Catherine and young Heathcliff, that would have made Joseph already in his late 20s, early 30s. He never gets abused, but I think because he's the only sane family member, he's kind of left alone. I was half expecting the character of Joseph to step into the role of father figure, but he never did. The fact that Henley, the older brother who's abusive at the beginning of the story, becomes kind of a father figure. All right. So the structure of this book totally reminds me of Frankenstein, because we have the character of Mr. Lockwood talking to Nellie. Nellie is like, Lockwood kind of arrives on the scene and Nellie starts telling the story, but it's Lockwood. It's Lockwood who's going, okay, so I heard this story from this maid, and here's the story. And that's what bookends it. Just like in Frankenstein, how the captain of the ship in Frankenstein comes across Victor, and Victor starts telling a story. Like, we open Frankenstein with the captain telling his sister, I just heard this amazing story. Here's how it went. This is the guy who told me, and here's how it went. So the structure is quite similar with Wuthering Heights, and Wuthering Heights did come out after Frankenstein. So Frankenstein did it first. You have to wonder, would these characters if left to their own devices. And I'm talking the second generation. If they could have broken free from the cycle of abuse a little sooner, because they do end up breaking away from the cycle of abuse. At least Harrington and young Catherine do. Whereas Lyndon, he kind of starts off as a sweet, innocent kid, but over the course of the book, he becomes so bitter and so nasty and so whiny and childish. He literally becomes what would become the cliche of a spoiled brat in other stories. He is pretty much the architect of the spoiled brat character. Now, this gets labeled a ghost story because we have a scene at the beginning of the book when Lockwood is staying in Wuthering Heights, and he sees what he thinks is Catherine at his window. And then again at the very end of the story, when the little shepherd boy says he saw Heathcliff and Catherine walking across the moors. But you could look at it too as the trauma that everyone kind of experiences is kind of haunting them. So, yeah, it's a ghost story. Is it a love story? No. This is not romantic. This is not a love story. Stockholm Syndrome? Very much so. This is a case of what, unfortunately, so many people who experience abuse end up just kind of like, shut up, be quiet, don't say anything, don't fight back, and eventually it'll stop. Anyone who's had a drunk in their family, an alcoholic family member, can totally identify with the characters in this book. Know from experience. Definitely a classic gothic story, but I wouldn't call this a romance. And sadly, it gets labeled as a romance all the time. There's nothing romantic about this story. Another thing I liked at the end was as young Catherine and Harrington were starting to form a bond, she teaches him to read. And you as the you as the reader, you catch on before the characters do that every time Harrington tries to improve his station, it's because he's so in love with young Catherine. And he proves it by eventually standing up to his uncle Heathcliff, to their uncle Heathcliff. And I know a lot of people kind of like, oh my God, they're cousins. She marries not one cousin, but two cousins in the course of 5 years. That was so common back in the time this was written for cousins to marry so that property could stay in the family, that wealth could stay within the family. Okay, well, I think this is where I'm going to end it. Wuthering Heights, I can say I've read it now. I know I just said I was going to end it, but I got to make another point here. Earlier in this video, and this video went way longer than I thought it was going to be, I mentioned how that one Eclipse from the Twilight Saga is supposed to be loosely based on this, and there's so many references, but, and I have to admit, it's been almost 20 years since I read Eclipse, because I read it right when the first movie came out. I read the entire Twilight saga back to back within like a month and a half of each other, right after the first movie came out. So I don't remember much of that book. But after having read Wuthering Heights, I don't really see it, how they're connected, but I'm sure they are, if the author says they are, and other readers have said they are. Eventually I will probably have to sit down and force myself to read Eclipse again, but this is a deeper book. This is not a light book if you're not willing to sit through the very much uncomfortableness. Like, this would make a great horror movie. Screw the romances. This is a horror movie. This book should be on the shelf in the horror section, because you're dealing with such horrible violence and grief. There's a couple of scenes where animals get beat up. There's the verbal abuse, the physical abuse. There's no sexual abuse, but it's kind of hinted at between Lyndon and young Catherine. And it's definitely hinted at between Heathcliff and Isabella. So, okay, I'm going to stop here. I've become so long-winded on this one. Until next time, creeping screams.